One good thing about having old Johnny out of the country was that I didn't have to watch Molly so close all the time. I knew there wasn't nobody besides me and him she cared much about, not unless you wanted to count Eddie White, and I never. Eddie was a shiftless old boy about my age. He worked around the oil patch whenever he felt like working, and when he didn't, he hung around Thalia, playing dominoes or running his hounds. He was too no count for a girl like Molly to pay much attention to. I think she just mentioned him once in a while to keep me and Johnny uneasy. I guess the best time me and her had all the time Johnny was gone was the day I took her fishing. We had shipped a carload of calves to Fort Worth just to try out the market, and Dad had gone with them to sit around the stockyards a day or two and watch them sell. When Dad took a big vacation like that, he always come back wanting to do all the work in sight in the first half hour. So I thought I'd better take me a little time off while I had the chance. It was late September then, a nice warm day, but not too warm. We had had our first little norther about 4 days before. It cooled things off to where they were just about right. I waited around the house till 9 or 10 o'clock, then caught my horse and rode across the west pasture and up the hill to the Taylor place. Old man Taylor was there, of course. He was sitting on the cellar, sharpening his pocket knife and drinking his morning whiskey. He was a terrifying sight. Along his cheeks his beard was white, but all of it that was underneath his mouth was a kind of muddy yellow from all the tobacco juice and whiskey he had dripped on it. "Clean your feet before you come in this yard," he said. "I don't want none of your damn cow shit in my yard." That would have been funny if he hadn't said it in such a mean voice. His yard looked like a slaughterhouse anyway. The old man done everything he had to do in the yard, and it showed it. There were bones and chicken heads and empty whiskey jugs and junk iron and baling wire and old shoes and pieces of plank and mule harness and horse turds and slop buckets and I don't know what all else scattered everywhere. Molly said she tried to clean the yard up once in a while, but the old man wouldn't let her. Anything that was there, he said, was there because he might need it. The miracle of it was that such a sweet, nice girl like Molly could have grown up in such a nasty place. I scraped my feet on the fence wire, and the old man never said another word to me. Molly was in the living room trying to kill a stinging lizard that had run in one of the wood boxes. She was dressed like a boy, in an old shirt and a pair of pants that had belonged to one of her brothers. They had all left home. But she looked like a girl. I wanted to grab her right there and kiss her, but if the old man had come in, there would have been hell to pay. "Let's go fishing," I said. "Guess what?" she said, grinning and looking happy. "I got a postcard from Johnny last week. Want to see it?" "No, I don't want to see it," I said. "I want to go fishing with you." "Now, do you want to go or don't you?" "Yes," she said. "Let's go right now. I just thought you might like to read Johnny's card. He mentioned you in it, too." I did want to read it, but I wasn't going to admit that to Molly. No telling what an idiot like Johnny would write on a postcard. "Your dad don't look in too good a humor," I said. "Get the poles out of the smokehouse and I'll wrap up some bait," she said. "Dad won't bother us. He likes catfish for supper." I got the poles and propped them against the fence and went down and saddled Molly's horse. The old man was still drinking and sharpening his knife. He never even looked up. In a minute, Molly came out with a lunch sack and a bait sack. She went up to the old man and hugged him a little with one arm and whispered to him and kissed him on one cheek and then come on out to me. She really liked that old bugger. It always surprised me to see it. He looked up at the lunch sack, but he didn't say anything. "Want to go to a tank or to the river?" I said. "Let's go to the big tank," she said, "south of the hill, in you-all's place." It was my favorite tank, too, but it was better for courting than for fishing. I never caught nothing there. There was a lot of Bermuda grass around it, though, and shade trees and nice places to sit. Molly was riding a little gray horse her old man had cheated a feller out of 2 years before. I was riding old Denver. We named him that because his mama come from Colorado. We loped nearly all the way to our fence before we pulled up. I let Molly go in front of me. Her hair was flying all over the place and her shirt tail come out. She rode good, though. There wasn't no cattle around the tank when we got there, and not a ripple on the water except once in a while when some dragonfly would light on the tank for a minute. We used liver for bait, and I put enough on the hooks to last a while, and stuck the poles in the mud. Molly sat down on the Bermuda grass in the shade, and I sat down by her and held her hand. We were all set to fish. It was about a perfect day. The sky was clear, and the sun felt warm like summer, while the air felt cool like fall. We lolled around on the Bermuda grass and courted and ate lunch and fished all day. We caught 3 fish, too. 2 crappies and 1 nice little cat. I guess we could have caught more if we had tried. We got a lot of nibbles, but Molly was so good to be with that day that I quit paying attention to them. I held her down and told her it was just turtles gnawing at the bait. She knew how inconvenient it was to catch turtles. Sometime in the early afternoon, when we were over under the big shade trees and not even pretending to fish, I finally asked Molly to marry me for the first time. There wasn't much grass under the trees, and we were laying on the slicker. We had been kissing a good deal, and she seemed to like me so much that I didn't see why not to ask her. I was crazy about her. "Molly," I said. "Say, Molly, we're sweethearts anyway. Why don't we go on and get married? Wouldn't that be the best thing to do? I sure would like to marry you." She kind of grinned to herself and wouldn't look at me. "Don't you want to at all?" I said. "You're the one for me, I know that for sure." "You're my favorite," she said, and sat up and kissed me. Giddington. "But what in the world would we do married?" "Why, what everybody else does, I guess. We ain't so different." "Maybe you ain't," she said, "but I am. I don't want to get into all that stuff yet. It ain't near as much fun as things like we're doing today." "How do you know?" I said. "You ain't been married. It might be more fun." She got kind of mad. "Don't tell me that," she said. "I don't want to marry you or nobody else. Girls who get married just to do a lot of things with boys ain't very nice. I don't like it. I'd just as soon do all those things and not be married, and I mean it. I ain't going to marry till I have to because of having a baby, and I mean that too, and I wish I didn't even have to then." Well, that shocked me as much as anything I ever heard, Molly saying that. It was just like her, though. She never cared what people thought about her. I guess she never thought she was very respectable anyway, growing up with the daddy she had. I knew a lot of people around Thalia who didn't think she was nice either, but they didn't mean anything to me. "Honey, don't talk that way," I said. "I'm crazy about you, and I just want you for a wife, that's all." She looked sorry then, but she looked kind of wild, too, and we lay there and hugged one another for a long time before she would talk again at all. "I'm crazy about you, too, Gid," she said, hugging my neck. "You're the best to me of anybody. But I ain't going to marry you. I mean it. I'll do anything you want me to but that. I'll do everything else if you want me to right now." And when I kissed her, she was trembling like a leaf. But we never managed it somehow. It was my fault. I guess I was too surprised at Molly, and I couldn't quit thinking about it. She practically took her shirt off, and that was something. But I couldn't quit thinking about it, and I knew it wasn't right, so I made her quit. "Now, we got to quit," I said. "You know it, Molly. Why can't we get married?" Then she got real cool and mad at me, but I was pretty mad too, and I didn't back down. "Let's go swimming, Gid," she said. "It's so hot. Then we can talk about it some more." She was cool as ice when she said that. "You hush," I said. "There ain't no use in you teasing me, and you know it. I ain't no damn kid. We got nothing to go swimming in, so how can we go?" "We got skin," she said. "I didn't know you was such a scaredy cat. Why do you want to get married if you're scared of girls?" "Now listen, Molly," I said. "I told you to quit teasing me, and you better do it before I shake the hell out of you. I'm sorry, but I ain't scared of you. I just know what's right and what ain't, and you ain't going to talk me out of it just because you're mad. And if you don't like it, you can just stay mad." "Don't ask me to marry you any more," she said. Only she wasn't mad then. She was kind of quiet. "Get off my shirt, honey. You're too sober. I never could get along with you. You didn't know I was like this, did you?" I grabbed her and made her let me hold her, even if she didn't want me to. "I may be too sober," I said. "I guess I am. But I'm not going to get stampeded into doing something crazy, even if we do both want to. You got to be a little careful about some things." "Okay," she said. "You done said that. Shut up about it. Let's fish or ride or do something. I'm tired of sitting here being so careful. I guess you're so careful you won't even want to hold hands with me no more, will you?" But after a while, she got in a good humor again, and we walked around the dam and rode horses some, and finally went home about 5 o'clock, just when the shadows were beginning to stretch out. The old man was gone when we got there, and I cleaned the fish for her. She cooked them and made biscuits and gravy, and we each ate one of the crappie, bones or no bones. We left the catfish for the old man. After supper, we went out on the porch and swung in her porch swing, and she was real warm and sweet again, and we kissed all we wanted to. I don't guess things could have been any nicer, except that I had already begun to feel mad at myself for not taking better advantage of the afternoon. But she acted like she'd forgot about it. She teased me a little about Johnny. "I know why you don't want to come see me as much anymore," she said. "It's because Johnny's gone. You don't really care much about me, do you? You just like to spite Johnny." She was wrong about that, and we both knew it, but it was true that I got a little extra kick out of being with Molly when Johnny was around to notice it. It would have probably been the same with him if he'd been in my place. I made up with her for the afternoon, only she wouldn't hear a word about marrying. I had to drop that for a while, but I didn't care. She gave me a big kiss just before I got on my horse and held onto my hand until I had to turn loose and ride away. And she stood on the hill and watched me go. Later I got awful mad at myself for being such a sissy down at the tank. I must have been either scared to death or crazy. I couldn't figure which. At least we could have gone swimming. That wouldn't have been no great crime. The more I thought about it, the worse it got, and it was all I could do to keep from riding back over that night. But I figured the old man would be back, so I never. I guess I always did think things over too much, at least where Molly was concerned. She was a special girl. Johnny, he would have done it and then thought it over later, but I always did the thinking first. The next time I got the chance, I decided I would try his way. But things never worked out too good. Dad rode in the next morning with about a month's work lined up to do, and I had to stay mad at myself all the time I was doing it. By the time things loosened up enough that I could get back over to see Molly, why, it was the middle of October, and Johnny was home again, and so I had him to worry about. If there was one thing I learned that day, it was not to miss no opportunities. I just wish learning it had done me a little more good. Chapter 4. I guess it was being so mad at myself over Molly that caused me to run off one night and court Mabel Peters. I knew at the time I didn't have no business doing it. In the first place, it was on a Friday night, and I never got off work till after dark, and I knew I would have to start again before sunup. And it was nearly 6 miles over to Mabel's house. I could have gone over and seen Molly with a lot less trouble, but I was still kind of ashamed of the way I acted around Molly. I didn't want to see her that night. Mabel wasn't the kind of girl I could get excited about in no permanent way, but every once in a while she was the kind I could get real excited about in a temporary way. Her folks were so poor, and they lived so far off from everybody that none of the boys courted Mabel much. She was right pretty in a neat, timid kind of way, but she never had no real boyfriends, and I knew she was so anxious for a sweetheart she would do most anything. So I wasn't very proud of the reasons I went to see her, but I went anyway. Mabel's ma and pa were pretty old and usually went to bed early. Except for one or two of the younger kids, Mabel was nearly always up by herself. I rode up to the yard gate in the dark and sat on my horse till the dogs kind of quieted down. One thing I hated about visiting the Peterses was them barking dogs. There must have been 6 or 8. I never knew old man Peters to keep no less. In a minute, Mabel came out and stood in the door. "Who's that out there?" she said. "It's just me, Mabel," I said. "I'd get down, but I'm afraid these dogs would eat me." "Gid?" she said. "Hush up, Pete, hush that." I guess Pete was the boss dog, because he went running over to her, and in a minute they all quieted down. Then I got off my horse and tied him to their mailbox. "Have you been to supper?" she said. "Come on in and I'll fix you some." But I never let her get me in the house. Their little old house always nearly suffocated me. It was an old chicken house was what it was. Old man Peters had just kind of rebuilt it. It never had but 4 little tight rooms, and they were so small and squeezed up and had such low ceilings that I couldn't hardly breathe when I was inside. I don't see how they lived through the summertime. It would have been like living in an oven. Mabel knew I didn't like it, too, and it always embarrassed her. She wanted me to come and see her, but then when I did come, she didn't have no nice place where we could go, and that preyed on her mind. Mabel was awful pretty in the face. I was just kind of awkward around her because it took me 20 or 30 minutes each time to get over feeling sorry for her. She'd worked and wanted her whole life, and she always looked like she'd do just anything for somebody who'd give her the chance to have some fun. "Aren't you going to come in a while?" she said. "We can't just stand out here on the steps." "No," I said. "I feel like moving around. How about you? I thought you might like to take a little walk with me. It's such a bright moonlight night, we wouldn't need no lantern." That was true. The moon was big and white that night, sailing up over the pastures. The Peters' house didn't have a porch, just front steps and back steps, because it was propped up on bricks. But old man Peters kept his wagon back behind the barn, and I figured that would be our destination. It was a good big Studebaker wagon, and he kept his wagon sheet in it. Mabel was agreeable enough to the walk. "That'd be nice, Gid," she said. "Where will we walk?" "Just here and there." She grabbed my hand herself and held on to me tight. I guess she was afraid of snakes. She walked so close to me I was afraid to move my feet for fear of stepping on her. I went dumb then. I could have kicked myself. I couldn't think of one thing to say. And I was a little snake-shy myself. Nobody's very anxious to get rattlesnake bit. But Mabel didn't mind the quiet. She walked along sort of humming to herself. "It's sure nice to see somebody," she said. "I swear Ma and Pa have been about to bore me plumb to death." "Dad bores me a good deal sometimes, too," I said. I was beginning to get a little excited from her walking so close to me that way. I never could understand how a little thing like Mabel could get me so excited, but she sure could. She was so thin you wouldn't even notice her if she was standing sideways to you, but once she got near you, she sure did make herself felt. We sashayed around by the post pile a time or two, and the pig pen once or twice, and then I sidled over toward the wagon. I didn't need to sidle. When I asked her if she wanted to sit down a while, she just nodded, and it wasn't 2 minutes till we were kissing like old sweethearts. Mabel never pulled back a time. It was always me. At first I was kind of wishing it was Molly that was there, but then I quit caring so much, and I guess we'd have done the whole works without no conversation or nothing if I hadn't made the mistake of stopping to ask. "You can if you want to, kid," she whispered. "I don't care. And then we can get married and start having babies. That's what I've always wanted to do. You'll be the best husband in the world." She just barely whispered that in my ear, but it hit me like a bucket of ice water. "Goodness, we can't do that, Mabel," I said. "Dad would raise too much Cain, and you're dead, too. Let's go ahead anyway." She didn't get mad or say a word back to me, and she kissed me a whole lot more, but it never meant anything then. She had put on all the brakes. I was so mad at her I could have stomped her for a minute, but she kept on acting sweet and happy and never seemed to notice. She did notice, though. She was just too sly to let on. That was the big difference in her and Molly. Molly was wild, but she was warm, and she wasn't sly. Mabel wasn't really a bit wild, but she was really cold and sly. Mabel's little brain was cold as an icicle. You couldn't guess that from the way she acted in the wagon. She cuddled up with me on the wagon sheet just as long as I wanted to stay, and I did stay a good while, hoping she would change her mind. But she wouldn't change her mind any more than the moon would change its direction. She sure did want to get married. Finally, I helped her out of the wagon, and we walked back to the house. She never talked at all. She knew she couldn't do any good talking, but she kept close to me. I practically had to crawl out from under her to get on my horse. It was just when I was about to ride away that she began to look real sorry. She had one hand on my ankle, and I was afraid she was fixing to cry. "Come back to see me," she said. "I get awful bored around here, and I don't like for nobody to come to see me but you." And before I could get away, I was feeling sorry for her again. I decided on the way home I would have to come back and give her another try. It had been worth it anyway. Only next morning I wasn't so sure. I hadn't been asleep but 2 or 3 hours when Dad came in and started shaking my damn foot to wake me up. That was sure a long day. Chapter 5. Johnny got back from the Panhandle on a Sunday night and went to work for us on Monday morning. He rode over about breakfast time to see how I was doing, I guess. It was branding season, and we were getting in some new cattle, so when Dad got back from his morning ride, he asked Johnny if he wanted to go to work on a day basis, and Johnny said he did. "And when I say work, I mean work," Dad said. "I ain't going to squander no $1 a day for you to sit on your butt." "I ain't never run from no work yet," Johnny said. "Of course, there's some kinds I'd rather do than others, but you're probably that way about it too, aren't you, Mr. Fry?" Dad grunted. He didn't like much conversation out of Johnny. "The kind I like best is none," he said. I thought working up on the big ranches might have given Johnny a little responsibility, but it never. He was just as wild and crazy as he'd always been. One thing I noticed, though, he must have done a lot of riding. His new saddle was broken in to where it was comfortable as could be. He let me ride it a time or two, and I liked the way it rode. He asked me right off if I'd been taking good care of his girl. "Mabel, you mean?" I said. "You bet, every chance I get." "Much obliged," he said, "only she wasn't really the one I meant. I don't guess you know who that would be." "I don't guess. Not unless it's Annie Eldenfelder." We carried on and kidded one another a lot. I was glad to see Johnny get back, really. Things were a good bit snappier with him around. He hadn't been working for us a week when me and him got into a real scrape with Molly's dad. We never meant to, either, because we both knew how she felt about him, and getting into a scrape with him was the best way in the world to get crosswise with her. But sometimes you don't have much control over what happens to you. A couple of our yearling steers had crawled through a busted water gap into Old Man Taylor's pasture. Dad seen their tracks going through when he was out on his early morning look-around, and when he got back to the house, he sent me and Johnny over there to get them out, which wasn't no trouble to do. We found them with the old man's milk cows and drove the whole bunch down to our gate and roped a yearling apiece and drug them through the gate where they belonged. It was still early then and chilly, with mist hanging over the ground nearly high as a horse's belly. We was glad for a little action to warm us up. It was when we were going to fix the water gap that we got in trouble. The first thing we done wrong was to ride down toward the creek on the Taylor side of the fence. We knew the old man would raise hell about that if he caught us, but we did it anyway, just to spite him. Then Johnny spotted a coyote. He loped through the fence about 100 yards ahead of us, and Johnny said he saw him squat down in the grass and stop. "Hell, let's rope that son of a bitch," he said. "I ain't never roped a coyote, have you?" "No," I said. "Reckon we can catch him?" But I was already making me a loop. I'd always wanted to rope one, and I figured this was my chance. Johnny, he couldn't throw his rope in the creek, so I never worried about him catching it. He made a loop big enough for a dinosaur to go through. "I tell you now," he said, "I can't see him, but he's right over there between them two big bunches of chaparral. Let's sneak up on this side of him so he can't dodge back through the fence. That way we can chase him clear to the north side if we need to. He ain't gonna sit forever, so when we get past that third post, let's charge hell out of him. You ready?" "He's practically roped," I said. "If you miss your first loop, haze him over my way so I can get a good throw." We held our ponies down to a slow walk till we got past the post. Then we jobbed the spurs to them, and away we went, holding up our ropes and yelling like mad. I lost my hat before we even seen the coyote, and Johnny lost his a minute later. In about 2 seconds, we was to the chaparral, and up Mr. Coyote come. He jumped plumb over the bushes, and it looked for a while like he was running along on top of the mist, 2 feet off the ground. Me and Johnny was right on his ass, and Johnny was done swinging. I swung to the side to give him room. Johnny had a damn good roping horse. He run right up by the coyote and leaned over, so all Johnny had to do was drop on the loop, but Johnny threw too late and missed about 20 feet. Only this throw turned the coyote, and it cut right under my horse while I was running full speed. I yanked to the right and went to spurring for all I was worth. Old Denver turned on about 15 cents and was after the coyote again before Johnny even got pulled up. By then we hit a strip of mesquite brush, and I thought we'd lost him. But then I decided to ride like hell and try to chase him through the brush and out into the clearing by the Taylor horse tank so I could get my throw. Into the brush we went, with me about 20 yards behind the coyote and Johnny somewhere back of me. I ducked and spurred, and the mesquite limbs flew. Only if Johnny couldn't rope, boy, he could ride. By the time we were past the middle of the brush, he went by me on the left just a-flyin', waving his rope and his horse jumping trees and bushes and limbs busting like crazy. The coyote was still ahead, though, sailing along on top of the mist. I spurred a little harder, and we all three hit the clearing about the same time. In a second, we were at the tank. I beat the coyote to the water about 2 steps and turned him over the dam. And Johnny was right there to keep him from ducking back. So he went over the dam and down on the other side, and I went right over with him and through while we were still half in the air. Caught him clean as a whistle. Old Denver fell then, and nobody could blame him. I went rolling off to one side and the coyote to the other. But when we all got up, we had a big dog coyote on the end of the rope. "Good throw, by God," Johnny said. "I thought you was going to turn a flip off that dam." "It's a wonder I didn't," I said. I was too out of breath to say much. Johnny got his rope on the coyote, too, and we had him where he couldn't do any harm. "I wish Dad was here," I said. "I bet he never roped one. One thing I could do, and that was rope." We were about to knock the coyote in the head and get the ears so we could collect our bounty when Old Man Taylor walked up to the tank dam from the other side. He had his 10-gauge shotgun in one hand and a couple of dead squirrels in the other. Probably they were going to be Molly's breakfast. When he got up closer, I seen his beard was wet, so I guess he had him a whiskey jug hid off in a stump somewhere. "God damn you boys," he said. "Goddamn trespassers. What are you little sons of bitches doing on my place?" We never said a word, but we didn't like it. People can't just come up and cuss you without you getting mad. Well, the cat got your tongues, he said. Answer me when I ask you something. Didn't your folks teach you no manners? We had to come over and get a couple of our yearlings and fix the water gap on the river, I said. Then we accidentally run onto this coyote and roped him. That's all, Mr. Taylor. Oh, you did you? He said. Boy, he looked mad. Young farts ought to have your asses kicked. We were getting about all we could stand of it, but we didn't know quite what to do. For one thing, we still had the coyote on the ropes, and the old man noticed it. Turn that coyote loose, he said. That there's my own coyote anyway. I don't ever want to catch you roping my coyotes again. Turn the son of a bitch loose. That was the silliest thing I ever heard of, claiming that coyote. No, sir, I said. We caught him coming out of our pasture, and we'll just have to take him back. I thought I could be just as silly as he was. Oh, you are you? He said, stuffing his squirrels in his hip pocket. Now, what about you, little McLeod? You get down and turn that coyote loose. Johnny was half tickled by it all. No, sir, he said. I would, only I'm scared to. I'm kind of a coward when it comes to getting one of my hands bit off. The old man got madder and madder, but he shut up and just stared at us. That's when I really got uneasy, and I don't know where it would have gone if Dad hadn't rode up about that time. For once in my life, I was glad to see Dad. Old man Taylor was just crazy enough to have shot us. I guess Dad missed me and Johnny and come to see what kind of mischief we was in. When Dad was impatient to work, it never took him long to miss a person. He rode up like there wasn't nothing unusual about the gathering at all. I see you boys been fiddling around, he said. I thought I told you to come on home when you got them yearlings out. How are you today, Cletus? No damn good, the old man said. Looky what them boys done. I wished you'd make them turn that coyote loose. I don't like boys roping coyotes of mine. Crazy old fart. Oh, you didn't look close enough, Cletus, Dad said. That's my coyote. See that earmark I put on him? Hell, I never even knowed he was out. It's lucky these boys found him. Once your coyotes get off in the brush, they're hard to find. I was flabbergasted, and so was old man Taylor. Johnny was just tickled. We all looked, and sure enough, the coyote did have a piece of his ear missing. And I don't know yet whether Dad was really responsible for it being gone or not. I imagine it was just chewed off in a fight, but you can't tell about Dad. Old man Taylor liked to swallow his Adam's apple. How do you mark your coyotes, Cletus? Dad asked, solemn as a judge. I never noticed. If you'll show me, I'll have these boys run what they find of yours back in your pasture. But old man Taylor was a pretty sly old bastard himself. You couldn't hem him up for long. He walked over and grabbed the coyote by the snout and looked at his ear. By God, it is yours, he said. I come off without my spectacles this morning. Say, he said, I like the looks of this coyote, Adam. How much will you take for him? That even surprised Dad, only he never much let on. He got out his plug and cut himself off some tobacco. Then he offered the plug to old man Taylor, and he cut off a bigger chew than Dad's. All the time Dad was thinking it over. I bet he thought it was funny as hell. Oh, I don't know, Cletus, he said. I ain't been watching the market too close. I'd have to get about $3 for him, I guess. By God, that's fair, the old man said, and I'll be damned if he didn't take out his pocketbook and pull 3 $1 bills out of it and hand them to Dad. Dad folded them together and stuck them in his shirt pocket. That was $1 more than the years would bring in bounty money. Good trade, the old man said. Wonder if them boys would help me a minute, Adam. I might as well earmark him while I got him caught. Sure, Dad said. You boys get down and help Mr. Taylor mark that coyote. The old man stood back and opened his pocket knife, and there wasn't nothing for it but for us to do the dangerous work. I went up one rope and Johnny up the other, and we managed to get his snout without being bit too bad. I muzzled him with my piggin string, and we threw him down and hog-tied him with Johnny's. Then the old man cropped his ear, and the job was done. Much obliged, boys, he said. Now I'll know the bastard next time I see him. Can I borrow your piggin strings and just leave him tied a while, he asked, real friendly. Tame him up a little. After a while, I'll send that girl of mine and get her to lead him up to the house. She ain't got a damn thing else to do. The thought of Molly having to drag that coyote to the house made me fightin' mad, but Dad was ready to go. Let's get home, boys, he said. We got them calves to brand. Much obliged, Cletus. Take care of yourself. Hope he makes you a good coyote. Oh, yeah, the old man said. He'll do. Well, that was a damn good trade, Dad said. $3 always comes in handy. Hell, we caught him, I said. We ought to get a little of it. We come to the gate, and Dad stopped and waited for one of us to get down and open it. Johnny did. "Oh, you think so, do you?" Dad said. "Well, I don't. He was my coyote to begin with. All you done was rope him. If you was to rope one of my calves, that wouldn't make it yours, would it?" "What made him yours?" I said. "You wasn't serious about that earmark business, was you?" He just kept riding and never answered. "Shit fire," Johnny said. "I believe I'll quit, Mr. Fry. I better go back and untie that coyote before Molly has to come drag him to the house. I don't want her fiddling with that big bastard. He might bite her hand off." "I'm with you," I said. "Let's turn him loose. We can get back in plenty of time to do the branding." "The hell you will," Dad said. "I just got you boys out of one scrape, and I ain't got time to get you out of another. Cletus is just waiting for one of you to come back so he can get that extra $1 out of your hide. He'll get it, too. Don't think he wouldn't." "$1?" I said. "You made 3. "Yeah, but Cletus will get 2 back when he sells them ears to the county." "Why, he ain't going to keep no coyotes. He just spent that money to keep from backing down." Me and Johnny couldn't hardly believe it. "You mean a poor man like him would spend $3 just for that?" I said. "Who's a poor man?" Dad said. "Cletus Taylor ain't poor. He's just tight. Just because he don't spend money don't mean he ain't got any. I don't spend much myself, and that's one reason I got so much more than most people." "Well," said Johnny, "if I was a man and I had money, I believe I'd at least buy myself and my daughter some decent clothes to wear. I wouldn't go around dressed disgraceful. I believe I'd spend a little of it enjoying life." "Most young fools would," Dad said. "That's why most young fools are broke." Me and Johnny shut up. There was no use arguing with Dad. And he was right about one thing. Just as we crossed the ridge, we heard the 10-gauge go klaboom like a damn cannon. "One less coyote," Dad said, "and that many more frying chickens I'll get to eat next spring. I'm glad you boys have finally learned to rope." Chapter 6. Old Man Taylor got his damn revenge anyhow, only he took it out on Molly instead of us. I could have killed him for it. 2 nights after the coyote roping, they were having a big harvest time square dance over in Thalia. It was about the biggest dance or get-together they had between the 4th of July and Christmas, and I had an agreement with Molly that me and her would go. I asked her the day we went fishing, while Johnny was still up in the Panhandle. He was mad enough to bite himself when he found out I'd done asked her. He ended up having to take Mabel Peters, and it served him right. Anyway, I got all spruced up and was going to use Dad's buggy. I drove over to Molly's just about dark, and I was sure excited. I didn't care too much about the dance, but the thought of getting to ride all that way with Molly sitting by me was something to be excited about. But when I got to Molly's, the house was completely dark. It surprised the devil out of me. There wasn't no light on of no kind. For a minute I thought Johnny must have pulled some kind of a sneak and taken her off already. I didn't know what to think. It was a still, pretty night, and not a sound to be heard. Finally, I hitched the horses and walked across the yard and up on the porch. Still not a sound. I hesitated a minute before I knocked on the door. I decided her old devil of a daddy was hiding in there someplace waiting to jump out and give me hell about the coyote. I walked around on the porch for a few minutes, hoping somebody inside the house would finally hear me and say something. Molly could have lain down to take a little nap and rest up for the dance. But nobody said nothing. "Hell fire," I said finally, and went up and knocked on the door good and loud. "I can't go tonight, Gid," Molly said, and it like to scared me to death. She'd been standing just inside the door all the time, but off to one side of the screen so I couldn't see her. "You'll have to go on without me," she said. "I ain't feeling good." "My goodness, Molly, you scared the daylights out of me. Why don't you turn on some kind of light?" "I don't want to," she said, and her voice was trembling. "I just want to be in the dark, Gid." And then it was real quiet, and I knew she was standing there crying, even if I couldn't see her. Molly cried the quietest. She never made a sound at all. Then I heard her move off in the dark and bump into a table or something and run down the hall, and things were quiet again. The only sound I could hear was the windmill creaking. I didn't know what to make of it. Something was bothering her pretty bad for her not even to ask me in. One thing I knew, I wasn't going to no dance without her. She could forget about that. But that didn't solve the problem of what to do. I had to get to talk to her, and the only way to do that was to go in the damn dark house and find her. I wished I had had enough sense to ask her if her dad was there. If she was the only one home, I was all right, but I could just imagine that old man standing in the living room with a club waiting for me. The more I thought about it, the madder it made me. I remembered how he had cursed me and Johnny when he found us with that coyote. Finally, I opened the screen door and doubled up my fists and clobbered on in. About 3 steps inside, I stopped and crouched over, watching for him. But he didn't come. If somebody had come in with a light, I would have looked silly as hell. Pretty soon I knew damn well he wasn't there. Molly wouldn't have let me walk into no bad situation without warning me, and the old man wouldn't have waited for me to come in. He would have come out. Besides, if he had been there, I would have smelled him. He was such a fragrant old bastard. So I went on down the hall to Molly's room and didn't give the old man another thought. Sure enough, she was in on her bed, crying. The moonlight was coming through the window. I went over and sat down on the edge of the old creaky bed and put my hand on her arm. "Now, honey," I said, "don't lay there taking on. Turn over and tell me where you hurt, and I'll see if I can find some medicine." It was strange, because Molly wasn't the kind that went around being sick. She wouldn't answer me, though, and for a few minutes I just had to sit there, holding her the best she would let me. She moved over under my arm and acted like she was glad to have me there, but she wouldn't look up. She wasn't crying loud, but she sure wasn't happy. In a little while I fumbled around and found some matches and lit the lamp. The minute I had the light on, I seen what it was all about. Her face and throat and the front of her dress was all wet from tears, but the trouble was she had a black eye. It wasn't a bad one. In fact, it kind of made her look prettier, or older in a way, but you could tell she had one. I knew who done it, too. "Don't you say a word against my daddy," she said. "I know what you're thinking. He wouldn't have done it if I hadn't been so mean." That was a lie, but I never said a word. "I sure am sorry about it," I said in a minute. "But it ain't bad, Molly. It ain't no reason to stay in the dark all the time. By tomorrow you won't even be able to tell it." I wanted to cuss the worthless old bastard good, but that would have just messed things up. "I know it, Gid," and the tears were pouring out of her eyes. I sat down and hugged her again. "But the dance is just tonight," she said, "and you're all dressed up and look so nice, you ought to go on. I had my dress all fixed, too. I'd been looking forward to it for I don't know how long. Why does it have to happen at such a bad time?" I could see how it was a pretty big disappointment, to a girl especially. Molly never got to go places very often. In fact, it was just very, very seldom that she went any place. When you come right down to it, she didn't like much being as cooped up as Mabel Peters. Only there was so much more of Molly to coop up. "Now hush, sugar," I said. "It ain't such a great calamity. This ain't the only dance there'll ever be. We'll get to go to plenty more." "No, we won't," she said. "I don't care." She pulled up the counterpane and wiped her face, but there was still a little puddle of tears in the hollow of her neck. She looked at me kind of mad, and I got out my handkerchief and wiped her throat. She was so pretty, black eye or not. "I wish there never would be another one," she said. "Then I wouldn't have to be so disappointed. I know I won't get to go, even if there's 100 dances. I guess I'm just too mean." "Oh, hush that up," I said. "You ain't mean, and you ain't hurt either. We can have just as much fun right here as we could have at the dance." "But I don't want to stay here. I stay here all the time, Gid. I wanted to go where there were a lot of people having fun." "Okay," I said, "let's go. It ain't late. That little old shadow on your eye ain't no reason to stay home." But that just made her cry more. I never knew girls had so much crying in them. Missing that dance didn't amount to a hill of beans in the long run, but Molly acted like her heart was broken. "Now you hush," I said. "This is a silly damn way for you to act. If you want to go, why get up and dry your face and let's go. Hell, by the time we get there, everybody'll be so drunk they wouldn't notice if you had 3 black eyes. And if you don't want to go, why hush anyway, and let's go in the living room and pop some popcorn or something. Crying all night won't do any good." Finally, she did hush and just lay back against me. I held her until I was sure she had calmed down. "That's better," I said. "Have you decided yet?" "We'll just have to stay here," she said. "I don't want to go to the dance unless I can go looking nice, and I can't do that with this eye. Besides, my dress is all wet, but you ought to go. Just think of all the girls you could dance with." "I don't know," I said. "Me and you may dance a little ourselves before the night is over. Johnny can take care of all them other girls." "He said he wouldn't. When I told him I had already promised you, he said he intended to go to the dance drunk and not dance a single time just to spite me." "Sounds like him," I said. "But what he says and what he does are 2 different things. You know that, don't you?" "Not when it comes to me, they ain't," she said. "Where's your dad tonight, anyway?" "He was out of whiskey and had to go to Henrietta. He may not be back for 2 or 3 days. "Let's go in the living room, then," I said. We did, but we never popped no popcorn. I had had a big supper anyway. We built a big fire in the fireplace. It was the only light we had. Molly started to the kitchen to get something, and I caught her in my arms and swung her around a time or two and kissed her. "Now, ain't this dancing?" I said. "Ain't this better than dancing in a big crowd anyway? If you ask me, that black eye is the nicest thing about you tonight." "I wish you'd take off that scratchy necktie," she said. "It's about to rub a raw place on me." "Boy, I will," I said. "It was choking me anyway." I took it off and my wool coat, too, but I never let Molly get to the kitchen. "Now let's dance," I said. "Just us two. Let's round dance. You hum the music." She put her head on my chest and hummed a little bit of some song. I hugged her against me real tight, and we moved around the living room floor in the shadows of the fire. "Let's just imagine the music, Gid," she said. "I can't remember what I'm humming half the time." "I ain't got that much imagination," I said, but we kept dancing anyway. We danced real slow. Molly's hair had a good smell. I got to wanting to kiss more than I wanted to dance, so I stopped and made her tilt her face up and let me. We stood there so long I expected the sun would be coming up, but it was still dark and shadowy. "I want to make up to you for the other day," I said. "I sure do love you." She kept standing there against me with her eyes shut and didn't say anything, but when I kissed her again, she seemed real glad.